Mike Thompson thought his prenup would shield his reputation when he divorced me for his secretary. What he forgot was Article 15 of our marriage contract, buried deep in the legal jargon he'd insisted his attorney include. The public humiliation penalty clause was designed to destroy unfaithful spouses, and when I activated it, his entire Tampa Bay real estate empire crumbled in 72 hours. I discovered the cryptocurrency wallet at 4:17 in the morning, its blue glow illuminating Mike's home office like a beacon of betrayal. $2.4 million in digital assets, hidden from me for over 2 years while he claimed we couldn't afford my father's experimental cancer treatment. The wallet wasn't the only secret. Bank statements scattered across his mahogany desk revealed offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, monthly transfers to shell companies, and recurring payments to 3 different women. One name appeared more frequently than the others: Jennifer Walsh, his 26-year-old secretary who'd been receiving $5,000 monthly for what the records called personal consulting services. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The foundation of my marriage to Mike Thompson began cracking the moment he slid that prenuptial agreement across the table at the Columbia restaurant in Ybor City. The historic venue, with its hand-painted tiles and old-world charm, should have been romantic. Instead, it became the scene of my first major mistake. Mike had chosen the location deliberately, knowing I'd be charmed by the ambiance and less likely to scrutinize the legal documents that would later become his downfall. "Sarah, darling, this is just standard protection," Mike had said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. His manicured fingers drummed against the table as he gestured toward the thick stack of papers. "Every successful real estate developer needs asset protection. You understand the liability issues in my business." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine with practiced warmth. "This protects both of us, actually. It ensures our marriage is about love, not money. I should have hired my own attorney. I should have taken weeks to review every clause, every subsection, every seemingly innocent paragraph. Instead, I was 29 years old, dizzy with love, and completely trusting of the man who'd swept me off my feet during a charity gala at the Palms Country Club. Mike Thompson was Tampa Bay royalty, the kind of developer who transformed waterfront properties into luxury condominiums, and had his photo in the business section of the Tampa Bay Times twice a month. When he proposed after 8 months of courtship, I felt like I'd won the lottery. The prenup itself was a masterpiece of legal manipulation, crafted by Jim Parker, one of Tampa's most expensive family law attorneys. 47 pages of dense legal language that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. The standard sections were straightforward enough: asset division, spousal support limitations, business interest protection. But buried in the middle, between clauses about intellectual property rights and retirement account handling, was Article 15. I'd barely glanced at it during that romantic dinner, trusting Mike's assurances that it was just boilerplate language that would never apply to us. Article 15 was titled Behavioral Conduct and Public Reputation Protection, and it was far from boilerplate. The clause established a complex system of financial penalties and public disclosure requirements designed to punish spouses who engaged in adultery, financial deception, or what the document called conduct prejudicial to the family's public standing. The penalties were severe: complete asset forfeiture, mandatory public disclosure of all financial records, and most devastating of all, compulsory public admission of wrongdoing through appropriate social and professional channels. Mike's attorney had explained the clause as protection against gold diggers or spouses who might... "It's unfortunately necessary in high-profile marriages," Jim had said, his tone suggesting this was a regrettable but standard practice. "The clause works both ways, of course, but it's primarily intended to protect the primary breadwinner's reputation and assets." The implication was clear. I was the potential threat, and Article 15 was insurance against my hypothetical future misconduct. What neither Mike nor his attorney had anticipated was that Article 15 would become my weapon of choice when their own arrogance and infidelity triggered its devastating consequences. The clause they'd designed to control me would ultimately destroy them both. Our early marriage had been everything I dreamed of. Mike was attentive, generous, and seemingly devoted. We lived in a stunning penthouse on Harbor Island with panoramic views of Tampa Bay. Our social calendar was packed with charity galas, business dinners, and weekend trips to our vacation home in Clearwater Beach. Mike's real estate empire was thriving, with developments from St. Petersburg to Sarasota, and he seemed to take genuine pleasure in sharing his success with me. I'd left my marketing position at a small firm to join Mike's company as Director of Marketing and Public Relations. The role was perfect for my background, and I threw myself into promoting Thompson & Associates luxury developments. Mike encouraged my involvement, praising my innovative campaigns and creative vision. "You're brilliant at this," he'd tell me after particularly successful project launches. "I should have hired you years ago, even before I married you." The first signs of trouble emerged during our second year of marriage, though I didn't recognize them as red flags at the time. Mike began working longer hours, claiming increased pressure from investors and city planning committees. Business trips became more frequent, often to markets where Thompson & Associates had no current projects. When I asked about expanding into new territories, Mike became evasive, claiming he was exploring opportunities, but couldn't discuss details due to confidentiality agreements. Mike's behavior toward me began shifting subtly. The attentive husband who'd once sought my opinion on everything from business decisions to vacation destinations started making unilateral choices. He'd book restaurant reservations without consulting me, accept social invitations on our behalf without asking my availability, and make major purchases for our home without discussion. When I brought up these concerns, Mike dismissed them as signs of his growing confidence in our partnership. "I know what you like," he'd say with a smile that no longer seemed genuine. "I'm just being efficient." The changes in our intimate life were more troubling. Mike became distracted during conversations, constantly checking his phone, even during romantic dinners. He'd excuse himself for urgent business calls that seemed to happen at increasingly inappropriate times. Our physical relationship, once passionate and spontaneous, became perfunctory and scheduled. Mike blamed stress from work, promising things would improve once current projects were completed, but those projects seemed to multiply rather than conclude. My father's cancer diagnosis arrived like a thunderclap during our third year of marriage. Dr. Patricia Williams, his oncologist at Tampa General Hospital, explained that Dad's pancreatic cancer was aggressive, but potentially treatable with an experimental immunotherapy protocol. The treatment wasn't covered by insurance and would cost approximately $180,000. The timeline was critical. Delay would significantly reduce the chances of success. I'd approached Mike with a mixture of hope and anxiety, knowing the sum was substantial but believing our financial situation could handle it. Mike's response was swift and non-negotiable. "Sarah, I understand this is emotional, but we can't afford that kind of expense right now. The real estate market is volatile, and I've got several projects requiring immediate capital investment. We need to be realistic about our limitations." His words felt like ice water in my veins. "Limitations? Mike, we just spent more than that on the yacht. You bought a Range Rover last month without discussing it with me." I gestured around our luxury penthouse, with its designer furniture and original artwork. "We're not exactly living paycheck to paycheck." Mike's expression hardened, and for the first time, I saw calculation in his eyes rather than compassion. "The yacht and the car are business assets, Sarah. They're tax-deductible and essential for client entertainment. Your father's treatment is a medical expense that provides no financial return. I'm sorry, but I have to think about our future security." The conversation ended with Mike storming out for what he claimed was an emergency meeting with investors. I spent the evening researching treatment options, seeking second opinions, and exploring financial alternatives. When I suggested taking a loan against our home or liquidating some of our investment portfolio, Mike became angry. "You're being emotional and irrational," he snapped. "I'm the one who understands our financial situation. Trust me to make these decisions." That night, alone in our king-sized bed while Mike worked late at the office, I made a decision that would change everything. I would start paying closer attention to our finances, to Mike's business dealings, and to the growing inconsistencies in his behavior. I wasn't naturally suspicious, but desperation has a way of sharpening perception. If Mike claimed we couldn't afford Dad's treatment, I needed to understand exactly where our money was going. The investigation began innocently enough. I started reviewing our joint account statements, looking for ways to reduce expenses or identify funds that could be redirected toward Dad's care. What I found instead was a pattern of unusual transfers and unexplained cash withdrawals. Large sums were being moved from our joint accounts to business accounts, then disappearing into what appeared to be a complex web of subsidiary companies and investment vehicles. Mike's explanations for these transfers were always plausible but vague. Real estate development requires complex financing structures, he'd say when I asked about specific transactions. Money moves between accounts constantly for tax optimization and cash flow management. It's too complicated to explain in detail, but everything is legitimate and properly documented. But the more I looked, the more questions arose. Why were substantial sums being transferred to companies I'd never heard of? Why were Mike's business trips to Miami coinciding with large cash withdrawals from our personal accounts? Why had our joint savings account balance been steadily decreasing while Mike's lifestyle grew increasingly extravagant? The breakthrough came during Memorial Day weekend, when Mike claimed he needed to fly to Orlando for an emergency meeting with potential investors. I'd offered to accompany him, suggesting we could make a romantic weekend out of the business trip, but Mike had refused. "This is sensitive negotiation, Sarah. Having you there might send the wrong message about my focus and priorities." His rejection stung, but it also triggered my curiosity. After Mike left for the airport, I decided to use the quiet weekend to organize his home office. Mike was naturally disorganized, and I thought surprising him with a clean, organized workspace might improve his increasingly sour mood. What I found instead was evidence of deception that went far beyond financial irregularities. The cryptocurrency wallet was the first shock. Mike had always claimed ignorance about digital assets, dismissing Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as speculative nonsense for people who don't understand real investment. Yet here was a wallet containing over $2 million in various digital currencies, with transaction histories dating back 18 months. The wallet was hidden behind password-protected folders on his computer, but Mike had written the access codes on a sticky note attached to his monitor, apparently confident that I would never think to look. The bank statements were even more damning. 3 accounts at different banks, all in Mike's name alone, containing balances that made our joint accounts look like pocket change. The primary account showed regular deposits from Thompson and Associates, but also mysterious transfers from offshore entities with names like Sunshine Holdings and Gulf Coast Investments. The amounts were staggering, $50,000 here, $80,000 there, with some months showing total inflows exceeding $200,000. But the preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The most devastating discovery was the recurring payments to individuals rather than businesses. Jennifer Walsh, Mike's secretary, was receiving $5,000 monthly. 2 other women, whose names I didn't recognize, were getting similar amounts. The payments were labeled as, quote, consulting fees, but the regularity and personal nature of the recipients suggested something far more intimate than professional services. As dawn broke over Tampa Bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that I'd once found romantic, I sat surrounded by evidence of my husband's betrayal. The man who'd claimed we couldn't afford my father's life-saving treatment was hiding nearly $3 million in assets. The husband who'd sworn fidelity was paying multiple women for services that had nothing to do with real estate development. The partner who'd insisted on a prenup to protect our love was systematically planning to abandon our marriage while securing his own financial future. Mike returned from Orlando Sunday evening, full of stories about successful negotiations and promising investment opportunities. He seemed relaxed and happy, probably because he believed his secrets were safe. As he described his weekend meetings, I nodded and smiled, asking appropriate questions while internally cataloging every lie and inconsistency. The man I'd married was gone, replaced by a stranger who could look me in the eye and fabricate elaborate stories about his whereabouts and activities. That night, as Mike slept peacefully beside me, I made a decision that would define the rest of our relationship. I would gather more evidence, document everything, and prepare for the war that was clearly coming. Mike might have the advantages of wealth, experience, and legal preparation, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd forgotten that Article 15 of our prenup worked both ways, and his own infidelity and financial deception had just triggered the most devastating consequences he could imagine. The next morning, I began planning my revenge with the same methodical precision Mike had used to hide his assets. I would use his own weapon against him, and when I was finished, his reputation, his business empire, and his carefully constructed life would be nothing more than rubble scattered across Tampa Bay. The week following my discovery felt like living in a parallel universe where everything appeared normal on the surface while chaos churned beneath. Mike continued his routine of early morning workouts, business meetings, and evening networking events, completely unaware that I'd uncovered his web of deception. I maintained my own facade, preparing breakfast, discussing weekend plans, and asking about his day with the same interest I'd always shown. The performance was exhausting, but it gave me time to plan my next moves carefully. My first priority was documenting everything I'd found. Using my marketing background, I approached the task like a comprehensive campaign audit, organizing evidence into categories and creating detailed timelines. I photographed every bank statement, screenshot every cryptocurrency transaction, and compiled a master spreadsheet tracking all the mysterious payments. The scope of Mike's deception became clearer with each piece of evidence. This wasn't opportunistic infidelity or simple financial irresponsibility. This was a systematic campaign to hide assets while preparing for what appeared to be a predetermined exit strategy. The cryptocurrency wallet was particularly revealing once I decoded its transaction history. Mike had been converting substantial amounts of cash into digital assets for nearly 2 years, coinciding with our discussions about starting a family. Every time I'd mentioned wanting children or buying a larger home, Mike had deflected with concerns about market volatility and the need for financial stability. Meanwhile, he was secretly stockpiling assets in a form I couldn't easily discover or claim. The timing wasn't coincidental. Mike had been planning his escape since the early days of our marriage, accumulating wealth while keeping me financially dependent and uninformed. The offshore accounts revealed another layer of premeditation. Sunshine Holdings and Gulf Coast Investments weren't legitimate business entities, but shell companies designed to obscure asset ownership. Through careful research, I traced both companies to a business formation service in Delaware, with registered addresses that led to mail forwarding services rather than actual offices. The money flowing through these entities came from Thompson and Associates, but was being diverted away from our joint assets and into accounts I had no legal access to under our current prenuptial agreement. Jennifer Walsh's financial relationship with Mike extended far beyond monthly consulting payments. Detailed credit card statements showed that Mike was funding her lifestyle completely, paying her rent on a luxury apartment in Hyde Park, covering her car payments on a BMW convertible, and providing her with a generous shopping allowance at high-end boutiques throughout Tampa Bay. The financial support had begun 6 months after she started working as his secretary, suggesting their relationship had moved from professional to personal with alarming speed. But Jennifer wasn't Mike's only financial dependent. The 2 other women receiving regular payments were more mysterious, but equally expensive. Through social media research, I identified them as Ashley Martinez, a fitness instructor from Clearwater Beach, and Sophia Chen, a graduate student at the University of South Florida. Both women led lifestyles that seemed far beyond their apparent income levels, posting photos from expensive restaurants, luxury vacations, and exclusive events that coincided with Mike's business trips and unexplained absences. The pattern that emerged was deeply disturbing. Mike wasn't just having an affair. He was maintaining multiple relationships with different women, funding their lifestyles while claiming financial constraints prevented him from helping my dying father. The money he'd refused to spend on Dad's treatment was being used to support his elaborate deception and multiple romantic entanglements. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, but it also provided me with exactly the ammunition I needed to trigger Article 15's devastating consequences. Understanding the legal implications of what I'd discovered required careful research. I spent hours reviewing our prenuptial agreement, studying every clause and subsection, with the attention I should have given it 3 years earlier. Article 15 was even more comprehensive than I'd initially realized. The clause didn't just penalize adultery, it specifically targeted systematic financial deception designed to hide marital assets and conduct demonstrating deliberate disregard for spousal welfare and family obligations. Mike's behavior checked every box that would trigger Article 15's penalties. His hidden accounts constituted systematic financial deception. His refusal to fund Dad's treatment while supporting multiple mistresses demonstrated deliberate disregard for family obligations. His elaborate lies about business trips and investment opportunities showed a pattern of deception designed to hide marital assets. The prenup that Mike had crafted to protect himself from my hypothetical misconduct had inadvertently created an ironclad case against his own behavior. The public humiliation requirements outlined in Article 15 were particularly detailed and brutal. The offending spouse was required to provide complete financial disclosure to their professional networks, social circles, and any organizations where they held membership or leadership positions. The disclosure had to include detailed explanations of the deceptive conduct, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and formal apologies to affected family members. Failure to comply would result in complete asset forfeiture and additional financial penalties that could easily bankrupt even someone with Mike's wealth. Most importantly, Article 15 included a clause that nullified all other protective provisions in the prenup if its terms were triggered. Mike's carefully constructed asset protection strategies would evaporate the moment I could prove his infidelity and financial deception. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the hidden cryptocurrency, and even his business interests in Thompson and Associates would become subject to equitable distribution in divorce proceedings. His weapon of financial control would become my path to justice and financial independence. But triggering Article 15 required more than just proof of Mike's misconduct. The prenup specified that evidence had to be presented through formal legal channels, with independent verification of financial records and sworn testimony from affected parties. I needed professional help to navigate these requirements and ensure that Mike couldn't escape consequences through legal technicalities or procedural challenges. Finding the right attorney was crucial. I needed someone with experience in complex marital law, knowledge of financial forensics, and the courage to take on one of Tampa Bay's most prominent real estate developers. After careful research, I identified Amanda Rodriguez of Rodriguez and Associates, a family law firm with a reputation for representing clients in high-asset divorces and prenuptial disputes. Amanda's track record included several high-profile cases where she'd successfully challenged seemingly ironclad prenuptial agreements on behalf of financially disadvantaged spouses. Scheduling a consultation with Amanda required careful planning. I couldn't risk Mike discovering my legal research or becoming suspicious about my activities. I arranged the meeting for a Thursday afternoon when Mike was scheduled to be in Sarasota reviewing a potential development site. I told him I was meeting college friends for lunch, a lie that felt insignificant compared to the deceptions he'd been maintaining for years. Amanda Rodriguez's office was located in a converted historic mansion in Hyde Park, its elegant exterior concealing a thoroughly modern legal practice focused on protecting clients from sophisticated financial manipulation. Amanda herself was impressive, mid-40s, impeccably dressed, and radiating the kind of confidence that comes from decades of successful legal battles. Her initial questions were probing but sympathetic, designed to understand both the legal complexities of my situation and the emotional toll of Mike's betrayal. Prenuptial agreements like yours are becoming increasingly common among high-net-worth individuals, Amanda explained as she reviewed the document I'd brought. The clauses are often heavily weighted in favor of the primary breadwinner, but they occasionally include provisions that can backfire spectacularly when the protected party violates their own terms. She paused at Article 15, her eyebrows rising slightly as she absorbed its implications. This is one of the most comprehensive behavioral conduct clauses I've seen. Your husband's attorney was very thorough in creating accountability measures. Amanda's assessment of my evidence was encouraging. The financial records I'd gathered were substantial and well documented, providing a clear pattern of deceptive conduct that would be difficult for Mike to explain or dismiss. The cryptocurrency wallet alone represented sufficient hidden assets to trigger Article 15's financial deception penalties, while the payments to multiple women provided overwhelming proof of adultery and systematic betrayal of marital obligations. The challenge, Amanda continued, we'll be gathering additional evidence that can withstand legal scrutiny. Your husband is clearly sophisticated in his deception, and he'll have access to excellent legal representation once he realizes what's happening. We need to be absolutely certain our case is airtight before we make any moves. She outlined a strategy that would involve financial forensics experts, private investigators, and potentially cooperation from Mike's business associates who might have witnessed his misconduct. The financial forensics component was particularly important. While I'd uncovered substantial evidence of Mike's hidden assets, a court would require independent verification of the accounts and transactions I'd discovered. Amanda recommended David Kumar, a forensic accountant who specialized in tracing complex financial structures and hidden assets in divorce proceedings. David's expertise would be essential in demonstrating the full scope of Mike's deception and ensuring that no assets remained hidden during legal proceedings. Private investigation would fill in gaps that financial records couldn't address. While bank statements proved Mike was paying Jennifer, Ashley, and Sophia, we needed evidence of the personal relationships those payments were funding. A skilled investigator could document Mike's activities, photograph his interactions with these women, and potentially gather testimony that would support our case. Amanda recommended Maria Santos, a former law enforcement officer who now specialized in matrimonial investigations. The timeline Amanda proposed was aggressive, but necessary. We needed to gather additional evidence quickly, while Mike remained unaware of our investigation. Once we filed legal papers or confronted Mike directly, he would undoubtedly take steps to hide additional assets or destroy evidence of his misconduct. The element of surprise was crucial to our success, but it also meant I would need to continue my performance as the unsuspecting wife, while secretly building the case that would destroy his carefully constructed life. Leaving Amanda's office, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror. For the first time since discovering Mike's betrayal, I had a clear path forward and professional allies who understood the complexities of my situation. But I also realized that I was about to embark on a legal battle that would irrevocably change both our lives. Mike's wealth and connections would make him a formidable opponent, and triggering Article 15 would unleash consequences that neither of us could fully predict or control. The drive home took me along Bayshore Boulevard, past the luxury condominiums and waterfront mansions that represented Mike's professional success. The afternoon sun sparkled on Tampa Bay, creating the kind of postcard-perfect scene that had initially attracted me to this city and this life. But the beauty felt hollow now, knowing that our own waterfront penthouse was built on lies and funded by money that should have saved my father's life. Mike was already home when I arrived, sitting on our balcony with a glass of wine and his laptop, probably reviewing property development proposals or checking his hidden cryptocurrency accounts. He looked up as I entered, his smile warm and seemingly genuine. "How were your friends? Did you have a good lunch?" The ease with which he could feign interest and affection was almost admirable in its audacity. "Wonderful," I replied, matching his tone and returning his smile. "We talked about planning a girls' trip to Key West next month. Would that be okay with your schedule?" The question was partly genuine and partly a test, curious to see if he would encourage time apart that might facilitate his own deceptive activities. "Of course, darling. You should take some time with your friends. I'll probably be traveling more anyway, with the new development projects ramping up." Mike's encouragement was immediate and enthusiastic, confirming my suspicion that time apart served his interests as much as mine. "Actually, I might need to spend more time in Miami over the next few weeks. There's a potential waterfront development opportunity that could be really significant for the company." I nodded and asked appropriate questions about his business prospects, while mentally noting that Miami was where Ashley Martinez lived. Mike's increased travel schedule would undoubtedly coincide with increased payments to his various mistresses, providing additional evidence for our case. His own eagerness to spend time away from our marriage was making my job easier, while simultaneously driving home the reality that our relationship had been a sham for longer than I'd realized. That evening, as Mike slept peacefully beside me, I reviewed Amanda's proposed timeline and strategy. Within 2 weeks, we would have financial forensics experts analyzing Mike's hidden accounts. Maria Santos would begin surveillance to document his relationships with Jennifer, Ashley, and Sophia. I would continue gathering evidence from his home office while maintaining my facade of marital contentment. And throughout it all, Mike would continue his deception, completely unaware that every lie, every hidden transaction, and every secret meeting was building the case that would ultimately destroy him. The irony was perfect. Mike had insisted on Article 15 to protect himself from my potential misconduct, never imagining that his own arrogance and infidelity would trigger its devastating consequences. The prenup he'd designed as a shield would become my sword, and I was looking forward to watching him realize just how completely his own weapon had been turned against him. The private investigator Maria Santos possessed the kind of understated competence that inspired immediate confidence. Her office in West Shore was sparse but professional, decorated with law enforcement commendations and photographs from complex cases she'd successfully resolved. Maria's background included 15 years with the Tampa Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit before transitioning to private practice specializing in matrimonial investigations. Her expertise in surveillance technology and financial tracking made her the perfect ally for documenting Mike's elaborate deception. "Your husband's pattern suggests someone who's become comfortable with risk," Maria observed as she reviewed the evidence I'd compiled. "Multiple relationships, regular payments, predictable travel schedules. He's not acting like someone who expects to be caught. That overconfidence will work in our favor." She outlined a surveillance strategy that would document Mike's activities without alerting him to our investigation, using techniques refined through years of law enforcement experience. Maria's initial focus would be Jennifer Walsh, whose relationship with Mike appeared to be the most serious and long-standing. Jennifer's luxury apartment in Hyde Park was perfectly positioned for discreet observation, and her social media activity provided detailed information about her schedule and preferred venues. Young women in these situations often document their lifestyles extensively online, Maria explained. They're proud of their designer clothes, expensive dinners, and luxury experiences. They rarely consider that their social media posts can serve as evidence in legal proceedings. The surveillance plan included both digital monitoring and physical observation. Maria would track Jennifer's social media activity, noting when posts coincided with Mike's business trips or unexplained absences. She would also conduct periodic physical surveillance, photographing Mike and Jennifer together at restaurants, shopping centers, and Jennifer's apartment building. The goal was building an irrefutable timeline of their relationship that would support our legal case while gathering evidence that Mike's business trips were actually elaborate cover stories for his infidelity. Ashley Martinez in Clearwater Beach presented different challenges but similar opportunities. Her work as a fitness instructor provided a predictable schedule that made surveillance easier, but her location required more complex logistics. Maria would coordinate with a Tampa Bay network of investigators to ensure comprehensive coverage without raising suspicions. Ashley's Instagram account was particularly revealing, featuring frequent photos from high-end restaurants and boutiques that her apparent income couldn't support. The discrepancy between her lifestyle and her legitimate earnings would be crucial evidence of Mike's financial support. Sophia Chen's status as a University of South Florida graduate student added another dimension to our investigation. Her academic schedule was more irregular, but her financial needs were also more obvious. Maria's research revealed that Sophia was pursuing a master's degree in international business while living in an expensive apartment near campus and driving a luxury vehicle that seemed impossible on a student budget. Graduate students living beyond their means always attract attention from university administration and fellow students, Maria noted. Her lifestyle will be noticed and remembered, which could provide additional witnesses to support our case. The digital forensics component of our investigation required specialized expertise that complemented Maria's surveillance work. David Kumar's background in financial crimes investigation made him uniquely qualified to trace the complex web of accounts and transactions that Mike had created to hide his assets. David's initial analysis confirmed that Mike's financial deception was even more sophisticated than I'd originally discovered, involving multiple layers of shell companies and international transfers designed to obscure asset ownership. "Your husband has created a textbook example of financial obfuscation," David explained as he walked me through his preliminary findings. "The cryptocurrency wallet is just the tip of the iceberg. These offshore accounts are connected to a network of business entities that are designed to make asset tracing extremely difficult. It's the kind of structure that takes months or years to create and suggests long-term planning rather than opportunistic behavior. David's deeper analysis revealed additional hidden assets that I hadn't discovered during my initial investigation. A real estate investment trust controlled through Sunshine Holdings owned several rental properties throughout Central Florida, generating substantial income that never appeared in our joint accounts. Gulf Coast Investments held a portfolio of stocks and bonds worth nearly $500,000, with dividends being automatically reinvested to avoid creating paper trails. Even more disturbing, David found evidence of a life insurance policy with a $2 million death benefit, where Mike had changed the beneficiary from me to Jennifer Walsh just 8 months earlier. The life insurance discovery was particularly chilling because it suggested that Mike's exit strategy might be more permanent than simple divorce. Changing beneficiaries on major life insurance policies typically coincided with major life changes like marriage, divorce, or the birth of children. Mike's decision to designate Jennifer as his primary beneficiary while still married to me indicated that he was already planning a future that didn't include our marriage, regardless of my knowledge or consent. This level of financial restructuring suggests someone who's not just having an affair, but is actively planning to dissolve their current life, David warned. Your husband may be preparing to file for divorce on his own timeline after he's finished moving assets beyond your reach. The fact that he's maintained this deception for years while you've remained unaware suggests he's very confident in his ability to control the narrative and outcome. The timeline David proposed for completing his forensic analysis aligned perfectly with Maria's surveillance schedule and Amanda's legal strategy. Within 3 weeks, we would have comprehensive documentation of Mike's hidden assets, irrefutable proof of his multiple relationships, and a legal framework for triggering Article 15's devastating consequences. The coordination between our 3 professional allies created a comprehensive approach that would make it virtually impossible for Mike to escape accountability through legal technicalities or financial manipulation. But maintaining my facade of marital contentment while secretly building a case against my husband required emotional strength I didn't know I possessed. Every morning, I woke up beside a man who was systematically betraying me while planning to abandon our marriage on his own terms. Every evening, I listened to his fabricated stories about business meetings and investment opportunities, while knowing he was actually supporting multiple mistresses with money he'd claimed we couldn't afford to spend on my father's medical treatment. The psychological toll of this double life was exhausting. I found myself analyzing every word Mike spoke, looking for additional lies or inconsistencies that might provide more evidence for our case. His casual mentions of business associates became potential witnesses to his misconduct. His stories about successful property deals became opportunities to verify whether his claimed activities matched his actual whereabouts. Even his expressions of affection felt calculated and hollow, knowing they were probably identical to the reassurances he offered Jennifer, Ashley, and Sophia. Mike's behavior during this period remained remarkably consistent with his established patterns, suggesting he felt completely secure in his deception. He continued working late at the office, claiming urgent deadlines and investor pressures that required his immediate attention. His business trips became more frequent, with destinations that coincided perfectly with the cities where his mistresses lived. Most tellingly, his mood seemed to improve significantly, suggesting that his expanding relationships and hidden assets were making him optimistic about his future prospects. The improvement in Mike's demeanor was particularly galling because it coincided with my father's deteriorating condition. Dad's cancer was progressing rapidly without the experimental treatment Mike had refused to fund, and his oncologist had begun discussing palliative care options designed to manage pain rather than cure the disease. The contrast between Mike's increasing happiness and my family's growing desperation created a moral clarity that strengthened my resolve to see our plan through to its devastating conclusion. My father's situation also provided perfect cover for the emotional distance I needed to maintain from Mike while our investigation proceeded. When I seemed distracted or less affectionate, Mike attributed it to stress about Dad's health rather than suspicion about his own behavior. My frequent phone calls and text messages could be explained as coordination with medical professionals rather than communication with attorneys and investigators. Even my occasional absences from home seemed natural given the family crisis I was managing. The cruel irony was that Mike occasionally offered comfort and support regarding my father's condition, apparently forgetting that his own refusal to provide financial assistance was the reason Dad couldn't receive optimal treatment. "I know this is difficult for you, Sarah," he would say, his voice full of apparent compassion. "But we have to trust that the doctors are doing everything possible with the resources available." His ability to offer sympathy while maintaining the financial constraints that created our family's crisis demonstrated a level of emotional disconnection that was almost sociopathic. Maria's first surveillance reports confirmed what I'd suspected about Mike's relationship with Jennifer Walsh. Their interactions went far beyond professional collaboration or casual infidelity. Mike was essentially maintaining Jennifer as a kept woman, supporting her lifestyle completely while receiving the kind of attention and devotion that he'd stopped providing to our marriage. Photographs showed them holding hands while shopping at International Plaza, kissing goodbye outside expensive restaurants, and spending entire afternoons at Jennifer's apartment during hours when Mike was supposedly managing urgent business matters. The evidence Maria gathered extended beyond simple documentation of their relationship to reveal the elaborate lies Mike had constructed to hide his activities. Business meetings that appeared on his calendar corresponded exactly with romantic dinners Maria photographed. Conference calls that kept him late at the office were actually extended visits to Jennifer's apartment. Even the expensive gifts I'd noticed Mike purchasing and claiming were client appreciation gestures were actually jewelry and designer items he was giving to Jennifer. "Your husband has created parallel lives that are remarkably detailed," Maria reported during one of our weekly briefings. "He's not just lying about individual incidents, but has constructed entire false narratives about his activities. The level of planning and consistency suggests someone who's been living this double life for much longer than the financial evidence indicates. He's practiced at deception in ways that suggest this isn't his first experience with systematic infidelity." Maria's observation about Mike's expertise in deception resonated with details I'd overlooked during our marriage. His ability to maintain complicated schedules, remember multiple versions of events, and provide plausible explanations for inconsistencies now seemed less like admirable organizational skills and more like practiced techniques for managing multiple relationships. How many other affairs had he conducted before Jennifer, Ashley, and Sophia? How long had he been using Thompson and Associates resources to fund his personal relationships, while claiming financial constraints prevented him from supporting his actual family? The surveillance of Ashley Martinez revealed a different dynamic but equally damning evidence. Mike's relationship with Ashley appeared more transactional than emotional, focusing on physical attraction rather than the quasi-romantic partnership he maintained with Jennifer. Their meetings typically occurred during Mike's claimed business trips to the Clearwater Beach area, where Ashley's fitness studio provided convenient cover for their encounters. The financial support Mike provided Ashley was substantial, but seemed designed to purchase access and discretion rather than build a long-term relationship. Sophia Chen's relationship with Mike was perhaps the most disturbing because of the obvious power imbalance involved. As a graduate student dependent on part-time income, Sophia was vulnerable to financial pressure in ways that Jennifer and Ashley weren't. Mike's support was enabling her to complete her education, creating a relationship dynamic where her academic future depended on maintaining his interest and satisfaction. The ethical implications of Mike's behavior toward Sophia extended beyond simple adultery to potential exploitation of someone in a compromised financial position. David Kumar's continued analysis of Mike's financial records revealed additional layers of deception that demonstrated the true scope of his systematic planning. The offshore accounts weren't just hiding assets from me, but were also concealing income from the Internal Revenue Service, creating potential criminal liability that extended far beyond our marital disputes. Mike's tax returns for the past 3 years showed significantly lower income than the amounts flowing through his hidden accounts, suggesting sustained tax evasion that could result in federal prosecution. "Your husband's financial crimes extend beyond hiding marital assets," David warned during our final briefing. "The discrepancies between his reported income and his actual cash flow suggest systematic tax evasion that the IRS would be very interested in investigating. Once these records become public through legal proceedings, he'll likely face scrutiny from multiple government agencies, in addition to the marital consequences." The implications of David's discovery added another dimension to the justice that Article 15 would deliver. Mike's public humiliation would extend beyond social embarrassment to include potential criminal investigation and prosecution. His carefully constructed real estate empire could face regulatory scrutiny that might reveal additional financial irregularities or business practices designed to hide assets and avoid legitimate tax obligations. The weapon he'd created to control me would ultimately expose him to consequences far more serious than simple divorce proceedings. As our investigation neared completion and Amanda prepared to file the legal papers that would trigger Article 15's devastating requirements, I felt a mixture of anticipation and sadness that surprised me with its intensity. Anticipation because Mike's systematic betrayal was about to face consequences that matched its scope and cruelty. Sadness because the marriage I'd believed in was revealed to be an elaborate performance designed to provide Mike with cover while he pursued his actual interests and relationships. But underneath both emotions was a growing sense of power and control that I hadn't experienced since the early days of our relationship. For months, Mike had held all the advantages: superior financial resources, legal preparation, and the element of surprise that comes from being the one planning deception rather than discovering it. Now those advantages were shifting in my favor, and Mike was about to learn that Article 15 of our prenuptial agreement was about to become the instrument of his complete and total destruction. The morning Mike chose to announce his intention to divorce me, the irony was almost poetic. He had selected our anniversary weekend for his dramatic revelation, apparently believing that the sentimental timing would make me more compliant and less likely to challenge his carefully orchestrated exit strategy. We were sitting on the balcony of our Harbor Island penthouse, sharing what I now realize was intended to be our final breakfast together as husband and wife, when Mike delivered the news that he believed would shatter my world but would actually trigger his own destruction. "Sarah, we need to discuss our future," Mike began, his tone carefully modulated to suggest reluctant necessity rather than eager anticipation. He had dressed more formally than usual for a Saturday morning, wearing the navy blazer and crisp white shirt that he typically reserved for important business meetings. The deliberate presentation suggested he'd rehearsed this conversation multiple times, probably with Jennifer Walsh, who had undoubtedly encouraged him to finally abandon the pretense of our marriage and commit fully to their relationship. Mike's opening statement was a masterpiece of manipulation, disguised as honest communication. He spoke about growing apart during our 3 years of marriage, claiming that our different goals and values had created an unbridgeable divide between us. He referenced my focus on family obligations, particularly my concern for my father's medical condition, as evidence that I wasn't truly committed to supporting his business ambitions and social aspirations. The reversal was breathtaking. My love for my dying father had somehow become evidence of my inadequacy as a wife, while his refusal to fund Dad's treatment was reframed as justified frustration with my misplaced priorities. "I've been thinking about this for months," Mike continued, his voice taking on the practiced sincerity he used with potential real estate clients. "We want different things from life, Sarah. You're focused on your family's problems, while I'm trying to build something significant in the Tampa Bay community. Jennifer understands my vision in ways that you never have. She shares my commitment to success and social advancement." The casual mention of Jennifer's name was clearly intended to establish that his decision wasn't impulsive infidelity, but rather a thoughtful choice between incompatible partners. Mike had apparently convinced himself that openly acknowledging his relationship with Jennifer would somehow make his betrayal seem more honorable, as if systematic deception was preferable to honest admission of growing apart. The self-serving logic was typical of his approach to every difficult situation we'd faced during our marriage. Reframe reality to justify whatever behavior served his immediate interests. Mike's presentation of the divorce terms was equally manipulative, designed to appear generous while actually providing me with minimal financial support. According to our prenuptial agreement, I would receive a modest lump sum payment and temporary spousal support, lasting only 18 months. The settlement would leave me financially secure enough to avoid appearing cruel but insufficient to maintain the lifestyle I'd grown accustomed to during our marriage. Mike would retain ownership of Thompson & Associates, our real estate properties, and all investment accounts, while I would receive enough money to rent a modest apartment and transition back to independent employment. "The prenup protects both of us from a complicated divorce process," Mike explained, sliding divorce papers across our breakfast table with the same confidence he'd shown when presenting the original marriage contract 3 years earlier. Everything is clearly defined, so we can handle this amicably without expensive legal battles or public disputes. You'll have enough financial support to restart your marketing career, and I'll be able to continue building the business we've worked so hard to establish. Mike's emphasis on avoiding public disputes was particularly revealing given what I knew about Article 15's public humiliation requirements. He was clearly counting on my desire for privacy and dignity to prevent me from challenging the divorce terms or investigating his financial affairs. His confidence in the prenup's protective power had blinded him to the possibility that his own conduct might have triggered the very consequences he'd designed the agreement to prevent. The arrogance was staggering, but it also provided me with the perfect opening to spring the trap that would destroy everything he'd worked to build. I read through the divorce papers carefully, taking my time to review each provision while Mike watched expectantly. His body language suggested someone who expected tears, pleading, or desperate attempts at reconciliation. Instead, I found myself genuinely curious about the legal language and financial projections. Comparing Mike's proposed settlement with what I knew about his actual assets and income, the discrepancy was enormous. Mike was offering me roughly 2% of his true net worth, while positioning the settlement as generous compensation for our brief marriage. "This is interesting," I said finally, setting the papers aside and reaching for my coffee cup. "Mike, have you reviewed Article 15 of our prenuptial agreement recently?" The question was delivered with the same casual tone I might use to ask about weekend plans or dinner reservations, but I watched Mike's expression carefully for signs of recognition or concern. Mike's initial response was dismissive confidence, exactly what I'd hoped for. "Article 15? Sarah, I don't need to review individual clauses. The prenup is comprehensive and legally binding. My attorney assured me that all contingencies are covered and that the agreement protects both parties fairly." His answer confirmed that he'd either forgotten the specific terms of Article 15 or had never believed he might be subject to its penalties. The oversight was about to cost him everything he'd spent years accumulating. "I'm sure your attorney was very thorough," I agreed, pulling out my phone and opening the document I'd photographed weeks earlier. "But Article 15 is particularly interesting because it addresses behavioral conduct and establishes specific penalties for spouses who engage in adultery or systematic financial deception. The clause creates quite severe consequences for anyone who violates their marital obligations while hiding assets from their spouse." Mike's confident expression began to shift as I read directly from the prenuptial agreement he'd insisted on creating. His face went through a series of subtle changes as the implications of his own legal document became clear. Confusion as he tried to remember the specific language, recognition as he realized what Article 15 actually said, and finally panic as he understood that his own conduct had triggered its devastating requirements. "The beauty of Article 15, I continued, enjoying the growing alarm in Mike's eyes, is that it requires the offending spouse to provide complete financial disclosure through public announcements in their professional and social circles. Hidden assets, extramarital relationships, systematic deception, everything has to be revealed and acknowledged publicly as part of the penalty structure." Mike's attempt to dismiss my threat was immediate, but unconvincing. "Sarah, you can't prove anything. Those clauses are designed to prevent false accusations, not enable them. Whatever you think you've discovered, it's not sufficient to trigger legal consequences." His voice carried a note of desperation that contradicted his words, suggesting he was already calculating which assets might be vulnerable and which relationships might be exposed. I reached into my purse and retrieved the flash drive containing David Kumar's financial forensics report, Maria Santos's surveillance evidence, and my own documentation of Mike's hidden assets and multiple relationships. The small device represented weeks of professional investigation and thousands of dollars in expert analysis, all funded by money from my separate savings account that Mike had never bothered to monitor or control. His assumption that I was financially naive and legally helpless was about to be proven catastrophically wrong. "This contains bank records from your offshore accounts, transaction histories from your cryptocurrency wallet, payment schedules to Jennifer Walsh, Ashley Martinez, and Sophia Chen, and photographic evidence of your relationships with all three women," I explained calmly. It also includes tax analysis showing the discrepancies between your reported income and your actual cash flow, which should be particularly interesting to the Internal Revenue Service. Mike's face went completely pale as he realized the scope of the evidence I'd gathered. His eyes fixed on the flash drive as if it were a weapon pointed directly at his heart, which in many ways it was. The device contained everything necessary to trigger Article 15's requirements and destroy the reputation he'd spent decades building in Tampa Bay's business and social communities. "Where did you get this information?" Mike demanded, his voice rising with anger and panic. "You had no right to access my private accounts or investigate my business activities. Whatever you found was obtained illegally and won't be admissible in court." His response confirmed that the evidence was genuine and damaging, even as he tried to challenge its legitimacy. "Actually, much of this information came from your own home office," I replied. "Amazing how many passwords you write on sticky notes, Mike." The offshore accounts were traced through legitimate financial forensics investigation, and the surveillance of your activities was conducted by a licensed private investigator using completely legal methods. Everything here will not only be admissible in court, but will also trigger Article 15's public disclosure requirements automatically. Mike's attempt to negotiate was immediate and desperate. "Sarah, let's be reasonable about this. I'll revise the divorce settlement, increase your financial support, maybe even help with your father's medical expenses. There's no need for public embarrassment or legal complications. We can handle this privately and amicably." The offer represented a complete reversal of his initial position, but it also revealed that he understood exactly how devastating Article 15's consequences would be for his business and social standing. "Article 15 doesn't allow for private resolution once it's been triggered," I explained, referring again to the prenuptial agreement text. "The public humiliation requirements are mandatory, not optional. You designed this clause to ensure that unfaithful spouses couldn't escape consequences through financial negotiation or private settlement. Congratulations, Mike. Your own legal strategy has trapped you perfectly." The realization that his own weapon had been turned against him seemed to physically stagger Mike. He stood abruptly from the breakfast table, pacing across our balcony while running his hands through his hair in obvious distress. The confident businessman who had calmly announced his intention to divorce me 15 minutes earlier was rapidly being replaced by someone who understood that his carefully planned exit strategy had just become his public destruction. "This will destroy my business," Mike said finally. Mike's plea about his business being destroyed carried a note of genuine terror that I found deeply satisfying after months of his casual dismissal of my father's life-threatening medical crisis. The man who had claimed we couldn't afford experimental cancer treatment while hiding millions in cryptocurrency was finally experiencing the fear that comes with losing everything you've worked to build. His panic was entirely justified, given that Article 15's public disclosure requirements would expose not only his personal misconduct, but also the financial irregularities that David Kumar had discovered throughout Thompson & Associates' business operations. "Your business empire was built on deception and hidden assets," I replied, maintaining the calm tone that seemed to unnerve Mike more than shouting would have. "The same financial structures you used to hide money from me were also used to conceal income from the IRS. When Article 15 forces you to provide complete financial disclosure, every government agency with jurisdiction over real estate development and tax compliance will have access to records showing systematic evasion and fraudulent reporting." Mike's attempt to minimize the tax implications was immediate, but unconvincing. "Those offshore accounts are perfectly legal international investments. Every successful developer uses sophisticated financial structures for tax optimization and asset protection. There's nothing criminal about diversifying investments or utilizing legal tax strategies." His explanation sounded rehearsed, suggesting he'd anticipated potential scrutiny of his financial arrangements and prepared justifications that his attorneys had probably crafted. But Mike's defensive posture couldn't obscure the fundamental problem with his situation. Article 15's requirements weren't limited to criminal violations or civil penalties. The clause demanded public acknowledgement of conduct that violated marital obligations, regardless of whether that conduct was technically legal. Mike's systematic concealment of assets while claiming financial limitations had directly harmed our family, creating moral culpability that transcended legal technicalities. The legality of your offshore accounts isn't the issue, I explained, enjoying Mike's growing desperation. Article 15 focuses on conduct that demonstrates deliberate disregard for spousal welfare and family obligations. You hidden millions of dollars while refusing to fund my father's cancer treatment. You've spent more money supporting Jennifer Walsh's lifestyle than Dad's entire medical treatment would have cost. The financial disclosure requirements will make those priorities crystal clear to everyone in your professional and social circles. Mike's recognition that his reputation would be permanently damaged regardless of legal outcomes seemed to deflate his resistance. Tampa Bay's business community was relatively small and tightly connected, with professional relationships built on trust and social standing that could take decades to establish but only moments to destroy. Once Mike's financial deception and multiple extramarital relationships became public knowledge, his credibility as a business partner and community leader would be irreparably compromised. The scope of Mike's professional vulnerability was particularly extensive because of his prominent role in Tampa Bay's real estate development community. Thompson & Associates had partnerships with major financial institutions, city planning departments, and wealthy investors who valued discretion and ethical conduct above all other considerations. Mike's public humiliation would force every business associate to reconsider their relationship with someone whose personal conduct demonstrated such profound dishonesty and moral bankruptcy. The Tampa Bay Business Journal will have a field day with this story, I continued, pressing my advantage while Mike stood frozen in obvious terror. Real estate developer hides millions while wife's father dies from treatable cancer. The headlines write themselves, don't they? Your investors will be particularly interested in learning that you've been moving company assets through offshore accounts while reporting lower profits than you're actually generating. Mike's final attempt at negotiation revealed the full extent of his desperation and moral flexibility. Sarah, what do you want? More money? A larger settlement? I'll transfer funds immediately for your father's treatment, even though it might be too late to help him significantly. Just tell me what it will take to resolve this privately, without triggering those public disclosure requirements. His willingness to suddenly fund Dad's medical care, after months of claiming financial impossibility, demonstrated that he'd always had the resources to help, but had simply chosen not to prioritize my family's crisis over his own interests. The offer to finally provide financial support for Dad's treatment was particularly galling, because Mike's timing revealed his true priorities with brutal clarity. He was willing to spend substantial amounts to protect his reputation, but had refused to invest those same resources when they might have actually saved my father's life. The calculation was coldly practical. Reputation damage could destroy his future earning potential, while Dad's survival provided no financial benefit to Mike's personal interests. It's too late for negotiation, I replied, standing from our breakfast table and gathering the divorce papers Mike had brought to formalize his planned abandonment of our marriage. Article 15's requirements are triggered automatically once sufficient evidence of misconduct is documented. The only choice you have now is whether to comply voluntarily with the public disclosure requirements or force the court to impose additional penalties for non-compliance. Mike's desperation reached a new level, as he fully grasped that his own legal strategy had eliminated any possibility of private resolution. Sarah, please be reasonable. I made mistakes, but destroying my reputation won't bring your father back or undo the problems in our marriage. We can work together to find a solution that addresses your concerns without devastating consequences for both of us. His appeal to reason and mutual benefit was particularly hypocritical, given that he'd been planning to devastate my financial security while abandoning me for Jennifer Walsh. The irony of Mike's plea for reasonableness was staggering. For months, he'd systematically deceived me, while positioning himself to abandon our marriage on terms that would leave me financially dependent and emotionally shattered. His careful planning had included changing life insurance beneficiaries, hiding assets beyond my reach, and preparing elaborate justifications for his conduct that would minimize social criticism. He'd shown no consideration for my welfare or feelings while preparing his exit strategy, but now expected me to prioritize his interests over justice and accountability. Reasonableness would have been honesty about your finances when Dad needed treatment, I responded, allowing some of the anger I'd been suppressing to color my voice. Reasonableness would have been fidelity to our marriage vows instead of maintaining 3 concurrent relationships while claiming to love me. You forfeited any claim to reasonable treatment when you chose systematic deception over honest communication about your intentions and priorities. Mike's recognition that his appeals to mercy were falling on deaf ears seemed to trigger a different strategy focused on minimizing damage rather than avoiding consequences entirely. If you're determined to proceed with this, at least consider the timing. Let me prepare my business associates and investors for the disclosure. Give me a few weeks to arrange my affairs so the fallout doesn't destroy innocent employees and partners who had nothing to do with our marital problems. The request for additional time to prepare was obviously designed to give Mike opportunities to hide additional assets, destroy evidence, or develop counter-strategies that might minimize Article 15's impact. His concern for innocent employees and business partners was touching but unconvincing, given that he'd shown no similar consideration for the impact his deception was having on his supposedly beloved wife and her dying father. Article 15 specifies that disclosure must occur within 72 hours of triggering to prevent exactly the kind of asset manipulation and evidence destruction you're contemplating, I explained, consulting the prenuptial agreement text again. Your attorney was very thorough in closing potential loopholes that might allow unfaithful spouses to escape consequences through delay and preparation. Mike's final strategy involved threats that revealed both his desperation and his fundamental misunderstanding of how completely his situation had deteriorated. Sarah, if you proceed with this vindictive course of action, I'll make sure your own conduct is thoroughly investigated. I'll hire investigators to examine your activities, your financial records, your personal relationships. If you want to play hardball, I can make your life extremely difficult as well. The threat was empty because Mike had no leverage remaining, and no misconduct on my part to expose. My investigation of his activities had been conducted through legal channels with professional assistance, and my personal conduct throughout our marriage had been exemplary. Most importantly, Article 15's requirements couldn't be avoided through counter-accusations or retaliatory investigations. Mike's own legal document had sealed his fate the moment he chose infidelity and financial deception over honesty and marital commitment. Feel free to investigate anything you'd like, I replied with genuine confidence. You'll find that I've been a faithful wife who discovered her husband's systematic betrayal through legal investigation and documented evidence. The only conduct that matters for Article 15's purposes is yours, and we both know what that investigation will reveal. Mike's complete defeat was evident in his slumped shoulders and defeated expression, as he finally accepted that his own weapon had been turned against him with devastating effectiveness. The prenuptial agreement he'd insisted on creating to protect his assets and reputation had instead become the instrument of his destruction, triggered by his own arrogance and infidelity. The man who had carefully planned every aspect of his deception had overlooked the most important detail, ensuring that his own conduct wouldn't violate the very clauses he'd designed to control me. When will this begin? Mike asked finally, his voice barely audible as he contemplated the public humiliation and professional destruction that would commence within days. The question revealed his acceptance that Article 15's consequences were inevitable, and his focus had shifted to understanding the timeline of his own downfall. Amanda Rodriguez is filing the initial papers this afternoon, I replied, checking my watch to emphasize the immediacy of the consequences he was about to face. The first public disclosures will occur Monday morning, beginning with your professional associations and business partners. The Tampa Bay Real Estate Board, your investors, and the Palms Country Club will all receive detailed documentation of your financial deception and extramarital relationships by close of business. Mike's attempt to maintain some dignity in defeat was admirable but futile. I suppose congratulations are in order. You've successfully destroyed everything I've worked to build over the past 15 years. I hope the revenge feels as satisfying as you've imagined it would. His bitterness was understandable, but misplaced, given that he'd created the circumstances that made his destruction both possible and inevitable. This isn't revenge, I corrected, gathering my purse and preparing to leave Mike alone with the consequences of his choices. This is justice delivered through the legal framework you insisted on creating. You designed Article 15 to punish unfaithful spouses, and it's working exactly as intended. The only difference is that you never imagined you'd be the one subject to its requirements. As I walked toward our penthouse door, leaving Mike sitting alone on the balcony where he'd confidently announced his intention to abandon our marriage for Jennifer Walsh, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with accountability. For months, Mike had held every advantage in our relationship: superior financial resources, legal preparation, and the element of surprise that comes from being the deceiver rather than the deceived. Now those advantages had shifted decisively in my favor, and Mike was about to experience the consequences of his own systematic betrayal. The drive to Amanda Rodriguez's office took me through downtown Tampa's business district, where Mike's professional reputation would soon be in ruins. Every building, every law firm, every bank represented potential witnesses to his upcoming humiliation, as Article 15's requirements forced him to publicly acknowledge conduct that would permanently damage his credibility and social standing. The man who had hidden millions while claiming we couldn't afford my father's cancer treatment was about to face justice that perfectly matched the scope and cruelty of his own deception. Amanda's office was bustling with activity as her legal team prepared the comprehensive filing that would trigger Article 15's devastating requirements. The documentation included David Kumar's financial forensics report, Maria Santos's surveillance evidence, and detailed analysis of how Mike's conduct violated every behavioral standard established in our prenuptial agreement. The legal brief was a masterpiece of evidence and argumentation that would make it impossible for Mike to avoid compliance with the public disclosure requirements he'd foolishly designed to control me. Your husband's own attorney created one of the most comprehensive accountability mechanisms I've ever seen in a prenuptial agreement, Amanda observed as she reviewed the final documents. Article 15 is so detailed and specific that it essentially eliminates any possibility of avoiding consequences through legal technicalities or procedural challenges. When he signed this document, he created an ironclad framework for his own destruction. The beauty of Article 15's requirements was their comprehensiveness and specificity. Mike couldn't claim ignorance of the consequences because he'd participated in crafting the language. He couldn't challenge the evidence because his own conduct had created the paper trail that documented his violations. He couldn't negotiate alternative penalties because the agreement specifically prohibited private resolution once the clause was triggered. His own legal strategy had trapped him perfectly, creating a weapon that was now pointed directly at everything he'd worked to achieve. The public disclosure begins Monday morning with professional associations and business partners, Amanda explained, reviewing the timeline we'd established for maximum impact. Tuesday, we'll notify social organizations and community groups where your husband holds membership or leadership positions. Wednesday, the complete financial analysis and relationship documentation becomes part of the public court record, ensuring that media coverage has access to comprehensive details. The 3-day timeline was designed to create escalating waves of revelation that would systematically destroy different aspects of Mike's reputation and social standing. Professional damage would occur first, as business associates learned about his financial deception and hidden assets. Social humiliation would follow, as country club members and community leaders discovered his multiple extramarital relationships. Finally, media coverage would ensure that his disgrace became permanent public record, searchable online, and impossible to escape or overcome. Mike's telephone call to Amanda's office that evening confirmed that he understood the futility of resistance, while still hoping for mercy that Article 15's language didn't permit. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Mike Thompson. I understand you're representing my wife in proceedings related to our prenuptial agreement. I'd like to discuss the possibility of alternative resolution that might address Sarah's concerns without triggering the more extreme consequences outlined in Article 15. Amanda's response was professional but unambiguous. Mr. Thompson, Article 15's requirements are triggered automatically once sufficient evidence of violation is documented. The agreement you signed specifically prohibits alternative resolution or private settlement once the clause is activated. Your only option is compliance with the public disclosure requirements within the specified timeline. Mike's final plea revealed the complete desperation of someone watching his carefully constructed life crumble in real time. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm prepared to provide Sarah with any financial settlement she requests. fund her father's medical treatment completely, and make any other accommodations that might resolve this matter privately. The public disclosure requirements will destroy innocent people who depend on my business for their livelihoods. Amanda's rejection of Mike's final negotiation attempt was swift and decisive. Mr. Thompson, your wife's primary concern is ensuring that your conduct faces appropriate consequences, not maximizing her financial recovery. Article 15's public disclosure requirements serve accountability purposes that can't be achieved through private settlement. The proceedings will commence as scheduled Monday morning. The weekend that followed was surreal, knowing that Mike was experiencing his final days as a respected member of Tampa Bay's business and social communities. By the following week, his reputation would be permanently destroyed, his business relationships would be in ruins, and his social standing would be irreparably damaged. The man who had systematically deceived me while planning to abandon our marriage was about to face consequences that perfectly matched the scope and cruelty of his own betrayal. Sunday evening, as I prepared for the week that would deliver complete justice for Mike's systematic deception, I felt a profound sense of closure that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with accountability finally being imposed on someone who had believed himself above consequences. Article 15 had worked exactly as Mike's attorney had intended, just not in the way they'd anticipated when designing the agreement to control me rather than protect our marriage. Monday morning arrived with the kind of brilliant Florida sunshine that made Tampa Bay look like a postcard. But the beautiful weather couldn't mask the storm that was about to engulf Mike Thompson's carefully constructed world. Amanda Rodriguez's legal team had worked through the weekend to ensure that every aspect of Article 15's public disclosure requirements would be executed with precision and devastating efficiency. The first wave of revelations would target Mike's professional relationships, beginning with the organizations and individuals who formed the foundation of his business empire. The Tampa Bay Real Estate Board received their notification at 8:30 in the morning, delivered by certified mail to ensure legal compliance while maximizing the impact on Mike's professional standing. The comprehensive package included David Kumar's financial forensics analysis, documented proof of Mike's hidden offshore accounts, evidence of systematic tax evasion, and detailed records of his multiple extramarital relationships funded through misappropriated business assets. The Real Estate Board's ethical standards required immediate investigation of any member whose conduct might bring discredit to the profession, and Mike's documented violations guaranteed swift and severe professional consequences. Mike's primary investors received their notifications simultaneously, each package customized to highlight the specific ways his deception had affected their business relationships. The documentation revealed that Mike had been reporting artificially low profits to minimize investor distributions, while secretly accumulating millions in hidden accounts. His systematic financial fraud had cheated his business partners out of legitimate returns, while funding his elaborate personal lifestyle and multiple romantic relationships. The breach of fiduciary duty was so comprehensive that criminal prosecution seemed inevitable, regardless of the civil consequences already triggered by Article 15. The Palms Country Club's board of directors received perhaps the most damaging disclosure package, because Mike's social standing had been built as much on his reputation for integrity and family values as on his business success. The documentation included surveillance photographs of Mike, with Jennifer Walsh, Ashley Martinez, and Sophia Chen, along with financial records showing how membership dues and club-related expenses had been used to launder money for his personal relationships. The club's moral conduct clauses provided grounds for immediate membership revocation, ensuring that Mike's social humiliation would be as complete as his professional destruction. Mike's attempt to preemptively control the narrative through damage control consultations proved futile, because Article 15's comprehensive disclosure requirements had anticipated and prevented such strategies. By the time he learned about the first wave of notifications, the evidence was already being distributed to every organization and individual who formed his professional and social network. His reputation was being systematically destroyed through his own legal framework, with no possibility of mitigation or alternative explanation. The second wave of disclosures on Tuesday targeted Mike's broader community involvement and civic leadership positions. The Tampa Bay Chamber of Commerce, where Mike served on the board of directors, received documentation that his hidden financial activities violated the organization's ethics policies and potentially exposed the chamber to regulatory scrutiny. His role as a community leader and business advocate became impossible to maintain once his systematic deception and financial fraud were exposed to fellow board members and chamber leadership. The University of South Florida Alumni Association faced particular embarrassment because Mike had been prominently featured in their fundraising campaigns as an example of successful graduates who maintained strong ethical values while building business empires. The revelation that his success was built on hidden assets, tax evasion, and systematic deception made the university's association with him a public relations disaster that required immediate distance and disavowal. Local charitable organizations where Mike had served as a major donor and board member faced the devastating realization that his contributions had been funded through fraudulent business practices and hidden income. The moral implications of accepting money obtained through deception created legal and ethical dilemmas that forced these organizations to return donations, remove Mike's name from buildings and programs, and publicly acknowledge their unwitting association with his misconduct. Jennifer Walsh's reaction to the public exposure of her relationship with Mike provided unexpected satisfaction because her outrage revealed the shallow opportunism that had motivated her participation in his deception. She immediately contacted local media outlets to claim that she had been deceived about Mike's marital status and financial situation, portraying herself as another victim of his systematic dishonesty. Her attempts to distance herself from the scandal while keeping the luxury apartment, BMW convertible, and designer wardrobe he had purchased for her demonstrated the same moral bankruptcy that had characterized their entire relationship. Ashley Martinez's response was equally telling, as she hired her own attorney to negotiate continued financial support in exchange for her silence about additional details of Mike's conduct. Her willingness to essentially blackmail Mike while publicly denying any knowledge of his marital status revealed that she had been fully aware of the deception and had participated willingly in exchange for financial compensation. The legal complications of her extortion attempt added another dimension to Mike's mounting legal troubles. Sophia Chen's reaction was perhaps the most damaging to Mike's remaining credibility, because her status as a graduate student made her appear more sympathetic to public opinion. Her revelation that Mike had specifically targeted her because of her financial vulnerability, promising to fund her education in exchange for exclusive access and discretion, painted him as a predator who exploited power imbalances for personal gratification. The university's investigation into their relationship raised additional questions about potential abuse of mentorship relationships and professional misconduct. The financial forensics investigation that David Kumar had conducted became the foundation for multiple government investigations once the evidence became public, through Article 15's disclosure requirements. The Internal Revenue Service initiated an immediate audit of Mike's tax returns, focusing on the substantial discrepancies between his reported income and the assets documented in his hidden accounts. The potential criminal liability for tax evasion could result in federal prosecution, substantial financial penalties, and possible imprisonment that would complete his personal and professional destruction. The Florida Department of Revenue launched its own investigation into Mike's business practices, particularly focusing on the shell companies he had created to hide assets and evade state tax obligations. The systematic nature of his deception suggested ongoing criminal enterprise rather than simple tax avoidance, creating potential charges under Florida's organized crime statutes that carried severe mandatory minimum sentences. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened an investigation into Thompson & Associates' financial reporting and investor relations, triggered by evidence that Mike had been systematically underreporting profits while diverting assets to his personal accounts. The potential securities fraud charges carried federal criminal penalties that could result in decades of imprisonment and complete forfeiture of his remaining assets. Mike's desperate attempts to salvage his reputation through public relations consultants and crisis management specialists proved entirely ineffective because the evidence against him was comprehensive and irrefutable. His own conduct had created the documentation that destroyed him, and no amount of spin or alternative narrative could overcome the financial records, surveillance evidence, and witness testimony that supported every allegation. The prenuptial agreement he had insisted on creating had eliminated any possibility of disputing the facts or avoiding accountability. The Tampa Bay Times published a comprehensive exposé on Wednesday morning that transformed Mike's local scandal into a cautionary tale about corruption and moral bankruptcy among Florida's business elite. The article detailed how his systematic deception had harmed not only his family but also his business partners, investors, and the charitable organizations that had trusted him with leadership responsibilities. The newspaper's investigation revealed additional victims who had been financially damaged by Mike's fraudulent business practices, creating a pattern of predatory behavior that extended far beyond his marital misconduct. The social media response to the newspaper coverage exceeded anything Amanda Rodriguez had anticipated when designing our strategy. Mike's name became a trending topic on local Twitter feeds, with hundreds of comments from business associates, former employees, and community members who shared their own experiences with his deceptive practices. The collective testimony painted a picture of someone who had been systematically dishonest in every aspect of his professional and personal life for years before his marriage to me. Thompson and Associates faced immediate financial collapse as investors withdrew funding, banks called in loans, and business partners terminated contracts. The company's reputation was so thoroughly destroyed that continuing operations became impossible, resulting in the termination of dozens of employees who had depended on the business for their livelihoods. Mike's concern for innocent workers had been genuine, but his own conduct had made their suffering inevitable once Article 15's consequences were triggered. The Palms Country Club's membership committee voted unanimously to revoke Mike's membership and ban him from the premises, ensuring that his social isolation would be as complete as his professional destruction. The club's action was particularly humiliating because it was announced in the organization's newsletter, which was distributed to Tampa Bay's entire social elite. His banishment from the venue where he had met me and proposed marriage provided poetic closure to the relationship that had begun with such promise and ended with such devastating betrayal. Mike's financial situation deteriorated rapidly as legal fees, government penalties, and asset seizures consumed his remaining resources. The offshore accounts that he had created to hide wealth became liabilities when foreign banks froze them, pending international cooperation with American law enforcement agencies. His cryptocurrency holdings became inaccessible when exchanges suspended his accounts in response to federal investigations. Even his legitimate business assets were tied up in legal proceedings that made them effectively worthless for meeting his immediate financial obligations. The criminal charges that resulted from the government investigations were comprehensive and severe. Federal prosecutors filed tax evasion charges that carried potential sentences of up to 5 years in prison and complete forfeiture of hidden assets. Securities fraud charges related to his investment partnerships carried additional penalties that could extend his imprisonment to decades. Florida state prosecutors added organized crime charges based on his systematic use of shell companies to hide income and assets. Jennifer Walsh's attempt to negotiate immunity in exchange for testimony against Mike backfired when prosecutors discovered that she had been fully aware of his deception and had participated in money laundering activities through her personal accounts. Her luxury lifestyle had been funded through financial crimes, making her a co-conspirator rather than a victim. The charges against her included conspiracy, money laundering, and tax evasion that could result in substantial prison time. My father's condition deteriorated rapidly during the weeks following Mike's public exposure, but the experimental treatment that we finally funded through the asset recovery process provided him with several additional months of quality time with our family. Dad lived long enough to see justice delivered against the man who had callously refused to help save his life while hiding millions in personal assets. His satisfaction with the outcome was evident during our final conversations, when he expressed pride in my strength and determination to hold Mike accountable for his systematic betrayal. The civil litigation that followed Mike's criminal prosecution resulted in complete asset forfeiture and financial compensation that exceeded anything I could have obtained through conventional divorce proceedings. Article 15's penalties, combined with the criminal restitution requirements, transferred virtually all of Mike's wealth to my control, while ensuring that he would face decades of financial hardship even after completing his prison sentence. The man who had planned to abandon me with minimal financial support was left with nothing while I gained financial independence that would last for the rest of my life. The final resolution of our case became a landmark precedent in Florida family law, demonstrating how comprehensive prenuptial agreements could backfire spectacularly when the protected party violated their own behavioral standards. Amanda Rodriguez's successful strategy was studied by legal professionals throughout the state as an example of how careful investigation and strategic planning could turn seemingly disadvantageous legal situations into complete victory for wronged spouses. 6 months after Mike's arrest and conviction, I moved from our Harbor Island penthouse to a beautiful waterfront home in Clearwater Beach that I purchased with funds recovered through the Article 15 proceedings. The house was smaller than our former residence, but felt infinitely larger because it was free from the deception and betrayal that had poisoned our marriage. My father spent his final weeks in a guest room overlooking Tampa Bay, surrounded by family who loved him, and supported by medical care that his former son-in-law could have easily afforded but had refused to provide. Mike's current situation provides the perfect conclusion to this story of justice delivered through his own legal weapon. He is serving a 12-year federal sentence in a minimum security prison in North Florida, where his former status as a prominent real estate developer has made him a target for inmates who particularly dislike wealthy criminals who have betrayed their families. His release date is scheduled for 2037, when he will be 50 years old with no assets, no business relationships, and a criminal record that will make rebuilding his life virtually impossible. Jennifer Walsh received a 3-year sentence for her participation in Mike's financial crimes and was required to forfeit all the assets he had purchased for her during their relationship. Her luxury apartment, BMW convertible, and designer wardrobe were sold at auction to satisfy restitution requirements. She now works as a receptionist at a small insurance office in Clearwater, earning barely enough to cover rent on a studio apartment while dealing with the permanent damage to her reputation and employment prospects. The prenuptial agreement that Mike had insisted on creating to protect his assets and reputation became the instrument of his complete destruction, triggered by his own arrogance and infidelity. Article 15 worked exactly as his attorney had intended, just not in the way they had anticipated when designing the agreement to control me rather than protect our marriage. Sometimes the best revenge is simply allowing someone's own weapon to be used against them with devastating precision. The lesson from this experience extends far beyond the specific details of Mike's downfall, to demonstrate how systematic deception and betrayal ultimately create the conditions for their own exposure and punishment. His careful planning and legal preparation couldn't overcome the fundamental weakness in his strategy, the assumption that his own conduct would never trigger the accountability mechanisms he had created to control others. The man who designed Article 15 to punish unfaithful spouses discovered that justice truly is blind, and accountability applies equally to everyone regardless of their wealth, status, or careful planning. 2 years after Mike Thompson's conviction and imprisonment, I received an unexpected letter that demonstrated how completely his world had collapsed while mine had flourished beyond anything I could have imagined during those dark months of discovery and investigation. The letter came from his federal prison counselor, requesting permission for Mike to contact me as part of a victim impact program designed to help inmates understand the full consequences of their actions. The irony was perfect. The man who had systematically deceived and betrayed me now needed my permission for even the most basic communication. The counselor's letter explained that Mike had been participating in financial crimes counseling and had expressed genuine remorse for the damage his actions had caused to our family. The program required convicted criminals to confront the human impact of their deception, moving beyond abstract legal penalties to understand how their choices had harmed real people with faces, names, and stories. Mike apparently wanted to apologize for his conduct and acknowledge the pain he had caused, though the timing of his newfound conscience conveniently coincided with his upcoming parole eligibility review. I declined the meeting request without hesitation, not out of bitterness or ongoing anger, but because Mike no longer occupied sufficient space in my thoughts to warrant the emotional energy required for such an encounter. The man who had once dominated my life through his systematic deception had become irrelevant to my daily existence, reduced to an occasional reminder of how completely someone's carefully constructed plans could backfire when built on lies and betrayal. His desire for forgiveness or closure was his burden to bear, not mine to provide. My current life in Clearwater Beach had evolved into everything Mike's deception had prevented during our marriage. The waterfront home I purchased with funds recovered through Article 15's penalties had become a sanctuary where I could rebuild my identity, without the constant stress of monitoring someone else's lies and inconsistencies. The house itself was a testament to the justice that had been served. Every room, every piece of furniture, every view of Tampa Bay represented money that Mike had tried to hide while denying my father life-saving medical treatment. The marketing consulting firm I established after our divorce had grown beyond my most optimistic projections, serving clients throughout Florida who appreciated working with someone whose integrity had been tested under the most challenging circumstances. The publicity surrounding Mike's case had initially created concerns about potential stigma affecting my professional reputation, but the opposite occurred. Business leaders who had witnessed my methodical approach to gathering evidence and pursuing accountability were impressed by the competence and determination I had demonstrated under extreme pressure. My father's final months had been everything we had hoped the experimental treatment would provide. The additional time allowed him to see justice delivered against the man who had callously refused to help save his life, providing a sense of closure that complemented the medical improvements the treatment had achieved. Dad lived to see Mike's conviction, to witness the complete collapse of his business empire, and to know that his daughter had successfully fought for accountability against someone who believed himself above consequences. The relationships I had built with Amanda Rodriguez, David Kumar, and Maria Santos had evolved into genuine friendships based on mutual respect and shared commitment to fighting sophisticated financial deception. Amanda had used our case as the foundation for a specialized practice representing spouses who discovered hidden assets and systematic betrayal, helping dozens of women and men escape marriages built on lies while securing the financial independence they deserved. David Kumar's forensic accounting expertise had been featured in multiple legal journals and professional conferences, with our case serving as a teaching example of how comprehensive financial investigation could uncover even the most sophisticated asset concealment strategies. His techniques for tracing cryptocurrency transactions and offshore account structures had been adopted by law enforcement agencies throughout Florida, helping prosecutors build stronger cases against financial criminals. Maria Santos had expanded her private investigation practice to include specialized matrimonial fraud detection, offering services to help people verify their spouse's financial honesty before marriage, rather than after betrayal. Her surveillance techniques and evidence-gathering methods had proven so effective that family law attorneys throughout Tampa Bay regularly recommended her services to clients who suspected their partners of systematic deception. The legal precedent established by our case had influenced prenuptial agreement drafting throughout Florida, with attorneys now carefully reviewing behavioral conduct clauses to ensure they couldn't backfire against their clients in unexpected ways. Article 15's comprehensive accountability mechanisms had been studied and refined, creating new standards for marriage contracts that provided genuine protection for both parties rather than one-sided asset protection disguised as mutual benefit. Mike's former business associates had faced their own consequences for their unwitting participation in his financial crimes, though their penalties were generally limited to civil restitution and professional sanctions, rather than criminal prosecution. Thompson and Associates' collapse had created opportunities for competitors who had maintained ethical business practices, demonstrating that integrity ultimately provided better long-term protection than sophisticated deception. The charitable organizations that had been forced to return Mike's donations had used the publicity surrounding their situation to launch successful fundraising campaigns based on transparency and ethical leadership. Their honest acknowledgement of the difficulties created by accepting money from fraudulent sources had actually enhanced their reputations within Tampa Bay's philanthropic community, proving that accountability and honesty could overcome even embarrassing associations with criminal conduct. Jennifer Walsh's release from prison, after serving 18 months of her 3-year sentence, had been marked by continued struggles to rebuild her life and reputation. Her criminal record made finding employment in professional settings virtually impossible, forcing her to accept minimum wage positions that barely covered basic living expenses. The luxury lifestyle that Mike had funded through fraudulent business practices had been replaced by the harsh reality of supporting herself through legitimate work for the first time in her adult life. Ashley Martinez had avoided criminal prosecution by cooperating with federal investigators, but her reputation in Clearwater Beach's fitness community had been permanently damaged by revelations about her relationship with Mike. Her attempts to continue operating her personal training business had failed when clients learned about her role in his deception, forcing her to relocate to a different city where her involvement in the scandal was less well known. Sophia Chen had completed her graduate degree despite the disruption created by the investigation and media coverage. But her academic achievements had been overshadowed by publicity about her relationship with Mike. Her attempts to build a professional career in international business had been complicated by potential employers who associated her name with the scandal, demonstrating how even peripheral involvement in financial crimes could create lasting consequences. The University of South Florida had implemented new policies regarding relationships between donors and students, recognizing that Mike's predatory behavior toward Sophia represented a pattern that needed institutional prevention rather than individual accountability. The university's response had been praised by education professionals as a model for protecting vulnerable students from exploitation by wealthy benefactors who might abuse their financial influence. The Palms Country Club had used Mike's case as an opportunity to strengthen their membership vetting procedures and ethical standards, implementing comprehensive background checks and financial verification requirements that went far beyond previous practices. The club's proactive response had actually enhanced their reputation among Tampa Bay's social elite, who appreciated the organization's commitment to maintaining high standards of personal conduct and financial integrity. The real estate development community in Tampa Bay had been permanently changed by the revelations about Mike's systematic fraud and asset concealment strategies. New regulations required more transparent financial reporting and independent auditing of development partnerships, making it significantly more difficult for future developers to engage in the kind of systematic deception that had characterized Mike's business practices. My personal growth during the years following our divorce had surprised me with its scope and depth. The woman who had trusted Mike's explanations and accepted his financial limitations without question had been replaced by someone who understood the importance of independence, verification, and maintaining control over my own financial security. The hard-earned lessons from his betrayal had made me stronger, more confident, and better equipped to build genuine relationships based on honesty rather than deception. The therapeutic value of seeing complete justice delivered through Mike's own legal weapon had provided closure that traditional divorce proceedings could never have achieved. The satisfaction came not from revenge or vindictiveness, but from knowing that his systematic betrayal had faced consequences that perfectly matched its scope and cruelty. Article 15 had worked exactly as intended, just not in the way Mike and his attorney had anticipated when they designed it to control me rather than protect our marriage. The financial independence I had gained through the asset recovery process had provided opportunities to support causes and organizations that reflected my values, particularly those focused on helping families deal with serious medical crises. The money that Mike had tried to hide while denying my father treatment had been redirected toward research and support programs that could help other families avoid the kind of devastating choices we had faced. My current romantic relationship with Dr. Marcus Chen, oncologist at Tampa General Hospital who had worked with my father's medical team, represented everything my marriage to Mike had lacked: honesty, mutual respect, shared values, and genuine partnership. Marcus's reaction to learning about my previous marriage had been supportive rather than judgmental, recognizing that my experience with betrayal had made me stronger rather than damaged. His own professional commitment to fighting cancer had created an immediate connection based on our shared understanding of how precious and fragile life could be. The house in Clearwater Beach had become a gathering place for friends and family who appreciated the peace and authenticity that replaced the elegant deception of our former Harbor Island penthouse. The smaller space felt infinitely larger because it was filled with genuine relationships, rather than carefully maintained facades designed to hide systematic betrayal and financial fraud. Mike's current situation in federal prison represented the perfect conclusion to his carefully planned deception and betrayal. His status as a white-collar criminal serving time for financial fraud had made him a target for inmates who particularly disliked wealthy criminals who had betrayed their families. The protection he had enjoyed through wealth, social status, and legal manipulation had been replaced by the harsh reality of institutional justice that recognized no distinction between different types of criminals. The prenuptial agreement that Mike had insisted on creating to protect his assets and reputation had become the instrument of his complete destruction, triggered by his own arrogance and infidelity. His weapon had been turned against him with devastating precision, delivering justice that was both poetic and practical. The man who designed Article 15 to punish unfaithful spouses had learned that accountability applies equally to everyone, regardless of their wealth, status, or careful planning. The lesson from this experience extends beyond the specific details of Mike's downfall, to demonstrate how systematic deception and betrayal ultimately create the conditions for their own exposure and punishment. His careful planning and legal preparation couldn't overcome the fundamental weakness in his strategy, the assumption that his own conduct would never trigger the accountability mechanisms he had created to control others. Sometimes the most perfect revenge is simply allowing someone's own weapon to destroy them completely. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.